All right, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. We're going to go ahead and get started. Before we jump in, I'm going to quickly do some introductions. My name is Marcos Canales. I am an assistant director with the Office of Academic Advising, and I am one of the two advisors who will be presenting to you tonight. So I will go ahead and have my colleague introduce, and then we will go ahead and get started.
Hello there. I'm Dale Thomas. I'm also in the OAA and also one of the assistant directors, and I'll be helping Marcos with the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Dale. So we'll go ahead and jump in. So there's a lot to cover tonight. So we're going to hopefully get this done in about an hour. We will ask that if you can save your questions for the end, or like Sophia had mentioned, if you just want to drop it in the chat, feel free to. But if you want to ask a question, if we can go ahead and get through the bulk, if not all of this material first, before we start opening up for questions, that will be helpful because hopefully most, if not all of those questions would be answered throughout this presentation. We are going to be recording this as well, and it will be available on our open file website by the end of the week, as well as we'll have a detailed open file guide for you and a lot of other different resources that you can look through. So if we can go ahead and advance the slide. So students are going to be going through open file. They're going to work closely with one of our OAA advisors. We are all official health profession advisors with the Association of American Medical Colleges, or AAMC. So we do know that we have a lot of expertise when it comes to this process in med school in general. So you'll definitely be having one of us, or possibly even more of us, working with you throughout this process. I believe Sophia also in the chat introduced herself. She is our health professions coordinator, and she will be the go-to person for many of your open file questions. So definitely feel free to contact her at hpa@rice.edu as well. So the purpose of open file, during our assessing your candidacy, which hopefully some of you were able to attend, we were giving you some tools that would help you reflect and prepare for medical or dental school applications to really help you decide if this is the entry cycle that you're going to be ready for. So hopefully, if you were able to attend that session, you were able to use of those various tools and resources to determine if this is going to be the right time for you to apply. If you've thought about it and you feel like this is the time for you to apply, going into fall entry year fall 2026, then open file is going to be our system that helps you get further guidance and support as you prepare for that application cycle. So open file itself is a process for students that allows them to receive first and foremost our Health Professions Advising Committee letter, HPAC for short, that formally introduces you to medical school and dental schools that you'll be applying to, and it also provides a narrative for your candidacy. So what happens is you're going to provide us with a lot of information about yourself so that we can actually write these HPAC letters. We call this process open file because you will actually be opening a file with our office. And then you'll also have a chance to get individualized feedback on your application materials and your overall candidacy. And so today we're going to outline the requirements for open file participation and the HPAC letter. Also, a few things to mention. Our HPAC committee consists of OAA advisors, so those you've been working with in the Office of Academic Advising, along with faculty members from the humanities, social science, natural science, and engineering divisions. HPAC, this service is actually optional, but this is something that Rice has been doing for over 30 years. So it's actually almost expected by medical schools for our students to go through the open file process and get an HPAC letter from us. You can still apply on your own if you'd like without the OAA's assistance, but again, that is pretty rare and it may actually raise some concerns for some medical schools. Also, it's important to remember that open file is open to our alumni as well. So if you are here tonight and you realize maybe you want a little bit more time before applying and you graduate from Rice, you can still come back to our office and work with us as an alum when it comes to the open file process. We do ask that if you do participate in open file, that our expectations are that you conduct yourself professionally before, during, and after the application cycle. I do know that some feedback that we received from actual medical schools is they feel like there's been maybe a little bit of a dip in professionalism when it comes to medical school application in the process, and so we don't want any of our students to be in that situation and get feedback that our Rice students were not conducting themselves professionally during the process. So we don't expect that from you all. We expect y'all to be amazing candidates and the pinnacle of professionalism, we do want to make sure that we reiterate that professionalism is still very important when it comes to this process. We also believe that it's not just only beneficial to get your committee letter, but it also gives you a chance to get some practice. In some ways, we kind of try to make this feel like almost like a mock trial or a mock run when it comes to applying and interviewing. So hopefully you'll also get those types of benefits from this process. We will say that we do limit this process to our medical and dental school applicants. Very few other health professions schools will require any kind of committee letter. You will see it maybe every once in a while. I do work with all of the students who are interested in, say, physician assistant school or optometry school. So if you're not quite sure if you need a committee letter, feel free to set up an appointment with myself so we can talk through all of those requirements. So with that said, I will hand it over to Dale.
So as Marcos indicated, we do have a lot of letters to write, and we have a lot of documents and students that we need to keep organized. So your help is really critical to making this process run smoothly and ensuring that we can stay ahead of all of our deadlines. Our goal is to submit letters to the application services by early July so that will not delay your application processing. And that's in line with the expectations from the schools and how other universities do it as well. So we do ask that you please not reach out to us to check on the uploading of your letter packet until at least Monday, July 14th. And I'll reiterate that later, but to check on the status of your letter. Here is an overview of the open file timeline. There's a prettier, more visually appealing version of this timeline that's already posted on our website. The website you can see up there in the upper right corner. So please bookmark that if you haven't already. The timeline is at the bottom, but there's going to be lots of other links that you'll be using along the way throughout the process. So again, we require a lot of information from you. And if you don't meet these deadlines, then we can't really represent your candidacy appropriately to medical and dental schools. So that's one important part of it. Also, most schools do operate on a rolling admissions basis. So any delays in submitting your files can significantly impact your admissions chances. Okay, we're going to go into each of the components that is sort of on this timeline and the documents in the coming slides in more detail. So the first step is actually just registering for open file, and that's going to open up tomorrow. And it's a two-step process to officially open your file. Both links are on that webpage that I showed before. So the first step is that you will need to pay a $150 registration fee. And we do have the option of discussing.
Sorry, Dale, you were accidentally muted.
I'm back. Okay. Thank you. We do have the option of a fee waiver if needed. If you need to discuss that, please email hpa@rice.edu. So the other step for registering besides paying the fee is to complete the applicant information form. And this is going to capture your basic information about yourself, your major, when you graduated from Rice, if you're an alumni, things like that, as well as a lot of contact information. It also has some waivers included in it, which involves waiving your access to your individual letters. That's in other words saying that you're not going to be able to read your letters of evaluation. You also give us the authorization to release your disciplinary record to schools on a need-to-know basis. You allow us to send your name and contact information to Rice alumni in medicine, which likes to build a database of Rice alumni who are pursuing medical careers. And we also ask you to agree to let us compile your name and contact information for a sort of in-house OAA directory that we can use to contact you on behalf of maybe future applicants who are looking to talk about a school or something. We reach out to you first in that generally. But those are the waivers that are also on the registration form. So the registration, as I said, it opens tomorrow, but it is then open until January 17th when the spring semester starts, essentially. And anyone who registers after that point will not be eligible for a pre-application appointment and will also get just a cover letter, rather than our full committee letter that is normally part of open file. So a cover letter is an abridged version of a committee letter. And late registrants also will not be eligible for mock interview opportunities with RPMS or with pre-dental interviews through the OAA. So we do really encourage you to sign up in time to get the full benefit of the process. So please help spread the word. If you have pre-med or pre-dental friends who are not here tonight, please let them know that open file registration is open. After you complete the 2 registration steps, you'll be sent an email confirmation from hpa@rice.edu. So look out for that. I don't believe it's something that's generated automatically, so you will need to wait for Sophia to go through processing the forms, but she'll get to that quickly. And then you'll be added to 2 box folders, and the 2 box folders, one is called HPA 2026 resources folder. The 2026 again is because right now this cycle that you would be applying in is to enter medical or dental school in 2026. So you'll see that come up a lot. And then you'll also receive a link to your own individualized box folder. And that's something where you're going to be uploading all of your required materials. Again, we're going to go into these in more detail in a moment. Reapplicants, if you have gone through the open file process before, actually whether you ended up applying to pre-health school or not, if you have gone through open file and had a box folder, please note that your personal box folder will be a new one. Do not use the individual box folder that you had in a previous cycle. So the first one I mentioned was the resources box folder, and here's a little bit of a peek at it over on the left. We're going to talk about some of what's in there. That's a folder that everybody is going to be added to, and it's really just things that you can access that are going to help you, and also some things that you're going to absolutely need. You can see here there are different kinds of informational documents and guidelines in here to deal with several different aspects of the application process, such as interviewing, affording medical school, testing protocols, and so on. I want to particularly call attention to the one where the title is in all caps, the open file required documents. Inside that, you will see the information with the required templates and guidance for each of the documents that we're going to ask you to upload as part of your participation in open file. So that's the most essential one. We hope the others are also useful, but that's the one you really can't avoid. I also want to draw your attention to the application workshop video, which you can see kind of lower down there on the screen on the left. That is a workshop that we put together, and we do recommend that you watch that before and after putting your materials together. These are some tips that our office has put together based on the kinds of feedback we found we were giving to students again and again in pre-app appointments. So we've put that all together for you in advance. And these are just some tips that you can use to strengthen your application and avoid common pitfalls. Again, there's also lots of other resources in that folder. You will also see there, we have our 3-part guide, which contains the answer to 95% of your questions. And that is on the open file website as well. It's in the open file guides folder here, and it's on the open file website. And then, like I said, you will also have your individual box folder, which is going to be labeled with your name, last, first, and then HPA 2026. And that's where you're going to be using to submit your documents that we require. So that will be empty. You get it. Okay, so on the individual box folder, from the time that you register, you have until January 31st to submit these 4 materials to your specific box folder. These are the 4 things that you're going to upload into your individual folder. And again, the one that's just labeled with your name. So the first one is an SJP disciplinary waiver request. And again, that is allowing us to get information from SJP about your disciplinary record that we are able to share then with the schools if need be on a need to know basis.
That's actually
The second one, please do mute your microphones if you're in the call. The second one is a CV, and I want to make a particular point that this is following a specific template that we have, because it's important that we want to help you organize the information that you about the activities you've done in a way that is most useful for us for presenting your candidacy. Then we have the pre-application appointment form, and we're going to talk about, again, these all in a little more detail. It's essentially a practice application and then a draft of your personal statement. So we encourage you to make use of the winter break to work on these. Again, the sooner that you sign up for OpenFile, the sooner you're going to have access to all this guidance and the materials. And we're going to detail them, like I said, in the next few slides. Again, if you miss the documents deadline or your materials aren't complete, then you won't be able to get a pre-application appointment, and you'll just receive a cover letter rather than the full committee letter. Note that the individual box folders will be locked on the January 31st deadline, so that is a firm deadline.
All right. So like Dale said, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about these various documents. So we'll start off with the Student Judicial Program's disciplinary waiver request. So all students must complete the SJP disciplinary request form, because it allows us to communicate between SJP and the OAA regarding your vice disciplinary record, if that's applicable. You want to note that just because you have a disciplinary violation, that will not necessarily prevent you from being admitted to a professional program. So definitely keep that in mind. We review that if you have any questions, you can always review the SJP FAQ page, as well as, again, letting us know if you have any type of those questions. So one thing we do try to tell all of our students, so while they're getting ready for applying, and if they do have an SJP warning or flag on their record, it's best to always be honest and clear about any SJP issues that you may have had. It's definitely one of those situations where you might be a little bit scared about disclosing that kind of information, fearing that it may affect your chances. But the thing about being upfront and honest about the situation is it allows you to control your narrative. It allows you to give more information about what happened, as opposed for them to find out after the fact. Because as part of the process for some individuals, there might actually be a line in our committee letters outlining what the SJP violation was. So if they are surprised by reading that in our letter, that should not be the issue. They should hopefully have an idea of what happened beforehand. So that's why we do encourage our students to be honest when they're going through this process, and be very clear about what happened, and more importantly, what you learned from the situation and how you overcame that particular issue. So in terms of how you go about submitting this information, so the release record, you'll release the record to the Office of Academic Advising in a pre-filled, this pre-filled on the form. Be sure you sign at the bottom of the form, and you do not need to upload a copy of your ID. So we'll move on to your CV. So we do require that you use the CV template provided in the box folder. You may be tempted to submit something that you've already used, or a format that you feel more comfortable with. But the reason why we ask that you use our template is, like Dale had said, we are going to be getting a lot of information. We're going to be writing a lot of letters, and it's easier for us to have just a simple, uniform document, so that way we know exactly if we want to find your activities, or we want to find your research or anything like that, we'll know exactly where to look, as opposed to using 80 to 100 different formats. So do try to make sure that you use the required template that we have provided for you in your box folder. It's important to remember that details are critical. So for example, instead of just putting on your CV that you shadowed a doctor, make sure that you actually include information like if they had a specialty, their actual name, where they were actually located, how many hours, the dates, things of that nature. So that way we have a lot more information to go on, as opposed to just saying so-and-so just shadowed a doctor. So next up, we'll look at the pre-application appointment form. So this is actually based on the actual application, with questions that are designed to elicit answers that these various schools are looking for and want to know about you. So in some ways, it's almost a mock application. So we do ask that you put sincere effort into this form. And if you do so, you'll actually already have largely completed a lot of significant portions of your pre-medical or pre-dental application by the time you actually start applying. which actually should really be helpful because it will accelerate and actually have you better prepared when you start that process. So we do encourage you to take your time when completing this form, again, as it may help you when it comes to fleshing out your personal statement or answering possible medical school or dental school interview questions as well. So just don't copy and paste bullet points. You actually want to make sure that you have full answers to these various questions that you'll go through this particular form. If we have any students who are reapplying, meaning that you have received an HPAC letter before, you'll actually have a separate form. We have a reapplication information form in lieu of the pre-application form. So keep that in mind that you'll have a different form you'll be filling out. You can submit both. However, if a substantial amount of time has passed since your initial application, it could be helpful in that case. But if you applied last cycle and are applying this cycle and nothing maybe has changed a lot in your pre-application form, then that's a situation where your reapplicant information form might be more useful. We also ask again for that a draft of your personal statement. So your personal statement gives you a chance to tell your narrative and your individual motivations and the path that you took to medical and or dental school. And it can also help you stand apart from other applicants. So you want to start this draft early as possible because it will take multiple drafts to make sure that you refine it, and just tweak it to make sure that it's as perfect as it can be. So you may be thinking what a strong personal statement will entail. So the things that it should address is it should be experience-based account of your career goals without just essentially writing out your CV. It should also give them a sense of your philosophy when it comes to healthcare. Why are you motivated to be entering a health profession? And then any unique characteristics or circumstances or life experiences that you feel will help you contribute to a diverse class. So a good exercise is to reflect on the experiences listed in your CV. You can describe how these various experiences have shaped your motivation to pursue medicine or dentistry. We have various sources that can help. For example, CAPC, the Center for Academic and Professional Communication, is available for individual consultation. You can also reach out to people that you know well and have them provide any kind of context about what they've read and share their perspectives. You can actually also bring a copy of your to your pre-application appointment, and we can help guide that conversation. So one thing I always like to kind of highlight based on these sources is actually having someone who knows you pretty well read your personal statement, because especially if they know you really well, like a family member, a friend, they'll be able to read through it and say, yeah, this sounds like you, or they can be like, yeah, you've never talked about any of this before. Why are you bringing this up now? They'll give you a good sense if it's authentic, if it sounds like you, if it aligns with what they know about you. So really do utilize that, because I know that sometimes people will suggest when it comes to letters or personal statements is to not have people who know you well read it, because they'll just tell you what you want to hear. But if they are really there to help you out, they'll be honest with you and say, yes, this kind of aligns with what I know about you, or no, this doesn't sound like you at all. So definitely consider that when you're looking at those options. There is going to be a personal statement workshop that is hosted by Rice Pre-Med Society, so you can definitely take advantage of that as well, regardless if you're medical or dental. And then I also wanted to note that there will not be another one of these workshops, so definitely make sure that you try to attend if you can. It will be on December 18th, and we'll have more information on where you can find that kind of information. And so lastly, requesting letters of evaluation. So that's another thing you're going to want to start thinking about and start doing in the next couple of months. More often than not, three-letter writers are going to be required, but you can have as many as five, or sometimes four, or sometimes five. Excuse me. The reason why we do try to limit it to, like, say, five maximum is the more letters of recommendation that are received and people have to read through, they will start seeing that there might be a sense of repetition. So you definitely want to make sure that your letters are unique, that they're quality letters, as opposed to just trying to get as many letters as possible. You can definitely take a look at your assessing your candidacy and open file guide for more details when it comes to selecting your individual letter writers. We do ask that you start this process early, ideally by February 10th, because one thing that you'll quickly find is a lot of your favorite instructors, professors, PIs may have a lot of other students asking them for letters of rec. So the sooner you ask, the sooner you can get a commitment to writing, the better. The longer you wait, they may have hit their own personal limit of how many letters they'll be writing this session. So that's why we do ask that you try to ask them as early as you can. One thing I also wanted to quickly highlight on this slide, especially for pre-dental students, you will need to have a letter from a dentist. So that's something you're going to also want to consider.
Okay, so not counting the letters, those other documents, like we said, are due to be in your box folder by the end of January, by January 31st. And then after you submit those materials, you'll have the opportunity to schedule a pre-application appointment, or we often just call it a pre-app, with one of the advisors in our office. And the time when you can schedule those is from February 5th to March 28th. That means that's when the scheduling links are open. So those are the dates when you can actually set up the appointment using a link in Navigate. The appointments themselves be slightly shifted later than that. The appointments themselves will take place from February 10th to April 4th. So in those 1-hour appointments, they have kind of a dual purpose as I look at it. One is for you to clarify and give context to your documents, to talk about any concerns you have about the application process, and to get an objective assessment of your strength as a candidate. It's also a chance for us to give you feedback on what you have. So we learn more about you as a person and as a candidate. That helps us write the strongest letter we can. And then we also try to help you improve your materials. So you can use this as an opportunity to present yourself professionally. We suggest business casual attire. It's not a formal or official interview, but it's kind of a chance for you to have a little practice at presenting yourself. But it really is a collaborative meeting. So we will reach out to all applicants who meet that documents deadline to give directions on how to schedule when we get to that point in the year. Another task that's ahead of you is to research schools. So as we progress through the next semester, you have a responsibility to research and choose where you would like to apply. There are many factors to consider, of course, but 20 to 25 schools is a common range for our students. There are 4 central application services, and this is a lot of acronyms. So one you'll hear talked about is AMCAS, which stands for the American Medical College Application Service, and that is the service that handles applications for most MD schools across the country. It's kind of the closest equivalent to doing a Common App application to college. Then there is ACOMAS, which is the American Association of Colleges of Osteopathic Medicine Application Service. That is the service that handles applications to most DO schools. Then we have the AADSAS. I don't know any way to say that faster. And that's the Associated American Dental Schools Application Service, which handles, again, the applications for most dental schools. And then because Texas is Texas, we have the TMDSAS, which is Texas Medical and Dental Schools Application Service, which is essentially all things Texas schools, including some of the Texas DO schools. So again, that can include MD schools, DO schools, and dental schools within Texas. And there are a few exceptions in Texas that don't use that service. So individual schools will indicate which service they want you to use to apply. And it sometimes depends on your residency or the program you're applying for, such as you might apply to a Texas medical school through TMDSAS for their MD program. But if you're applying MD PhD, you're likely to have to go through AMCAS for that. Our typical applicant will apply using multiple services. So a large majority of our students apply to at least 2 of those. Sorry, there are obviously some other details here about resources and fee assistance, but we're not going to go in depth on those right now. I did want to talk a little bit about the distinction between MD and DO schools, 2 different types of medical degree. Both degrees can be certified to practice every medical specialty in every state. So DO stands for Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. Osteopathic medicine generally emphasizes a holistic approach to care. Doctors are trained to look at the whole patient, not just its symptoms. They are trained to integrate the patient into the healthcare process as a partner as well. So if this matches your philosophy of medicine, we encourage you to consider DO programs. The DO schools were kind of historically focused on primary care, but now nearly half of all DOs practice in non-primary care specialties. So that is a myth if you feel like DO is only relevant if you're looking at being a primary care physician. DO students do now also participate equally in the same residency match process alongside MD students, and they have similar outcomes. DO programs are rapidly gaining in popularity. So currently 1/4 of all medical school students in the US are at DO schools. So it really is growing as a portion of the medical student population. The DO application cycle does generally run a little bit later. So one option you can consider is to focus that earliest part of your application time on the MD schools in the summer, and then in the fall, turn your attention to some of the DO schools if you're sure you're looking at ones that have later deadlines. DO schools do have slightly lower averages for MCAT and GPA among their accepted students. And so that also can be a useful option for people who feel like their metrics may hold them back from some of the options in the MD schools. But that's certainly not the only reason to consider DO schools.
All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit and start talking about application costs. So the number of schools to which you may apply can be affected by the cost. So you want to keep in mind these numbers. Also, you're going to want to possibly account for the cost of the interview itself. So this could include travel, lodging, other expenses that you may have. That said, more and more schools are offering virtual interviews now, but there's always a chance that they may still have an in-person component. So while you're thinking about your school list and you're coming up with your plan for the application cycle, again, you're definitely going to want to make sure that you take all these costs into account and seeing the various differences. So like, for example, AMCAS has the 175 initial fee and then 45 additional fee for additional schools that you would apply to. You'll see the same thing with ACOMAS and ADSAS as well. So again, when you're looking at the number, you always want to make sure that you take these costs into account, because one thing that I always try to tell students when it comes to the number of schools is you also don't want to apply with above your means. You don't want to, be bankrupt because you applied to so many schools and you had all these fees. So you definitely want to be strategic. Now, we're not going to say limit your school list, but you also want to make sure that you are intentional with your applications and your school list. One thing we definitely try to encourage all of our students is to don't apply to a school that you don't plan on attending, because A, it'll add up to these costs, but then B, it's a bad look if someone applies and then they really weren't seriously looking at that particular institution. And that can actually have some ramifications down the line. So again, we can always understand why you would want to cast a very wide net when it comes to applying to medical and dental schools, but you also want to make sure that you're, again, strategic when it comes to those lists in that application cycle. So I'll talk about next are transcripts. So our office will submit your HPAC letter and your individual letters to the application services, and you'll need to submit all other components for the application, including your transcripts. So students are required to submit transcripts for each accredited institution that are attending. To request a RICE transcript, you'll have to visit the registrar's website. Each application service requires a transcript request form to be sent with your transcript, as this includes an applicant ID. These forms are created after a student inputs schools they have attended in the application services. And the open file guide outlines this as well. It's important to remember that study abroad courses through RICE approved study abroad programs are generally accepted on a RICE transcript, but you also want to remember that application services do not accept foreign transcripts. Be sure to carefully follow the guidelines for each application service regarding transcript submission and study abroad credits. And you'll also want to note that you're also required to submit test scores for the MCAT or DAT to each application service. So what we'll talk about next is Private Folio, which is a system we use to collect all of your letters of evaluation. So RICE-specific sign-up links that covers a year to use Private Folio, and it allows us to see and download your letters of evaluation. So If you already have an account with Private Folio or you're a reapplicant, please email hp@rice.edu so that we can get your account covered and link your account to our lists of students. When you request letters through Private Folio, you'll type in your letter writer's name, email, and a short message requesting a letter of evaluation. Before requesting a letter through Private Folio, contact your letter writers and ask if they will be able to write a strong letter recommendation for you. Letter writers should not be surprised when they get this email from Private Folio, so you want to make sure that you've already secured letter writers before you start this process. Send each letter writer the instructions to writers of letters of evaluation form that's located in the resources box folder, which you will receive access to after signing up for Open File, which also will have instructions and guidelines. In terms of processing letters, when you're filling out your school applications, you'll select that you will be receiving a committee letter packet. A committee letter packet is your committee letter plus your individual letters or recommendations. So we'll collect them all and send them at once. You'll need to grant access for advisors to see your applications so we can upload your committee letter packets. Applications will ask for contact information of who will upload your committee letter. You'll actually use Sophia's contact information located in part 2 of the Open File Guide. You want to make sure all of this information is spelled correctly, or Sophia will not be able to upload your letters. Once all of you see that your letters have been uploaded to Private Folio, you'll email your locked letter form to hpa@rice.edu, titled locked letter form with your last name, comma, first name. Most programs will have a limit on how many letters of evaluation they will receive. So if you decide to request more than 3 or 4, make sure that you list the letters in order that you want them to be read. Keep in mind as well that requirements sent by the programs you plan to attend are, of course, keep in mind the requirements set by the program you plan to apply to. Sorry. Packets should be uploaded to the application services by early July, like Dale had mentioned. If there are any delays in receiving letters or issues with letters, this could delay your packet getting uploaded and possibly your application processing. So again, you want to make sure that you get everything in as early as you can. Like we mentioned before, we want to reiterate it. Please try not to contact us before July 14th when it comes to this process. You'll likely get an email from a medical school saying that your application is not complete until they've received your letters of recommendation or something to the like. Again, don't panic. These are just general emails sent to all applicants. And like we said earlier, this timeline is in line with other undergraduate institutions. And it's actually the timeline that medical school and dental schools expect. So one thing I kind of want to underline when it comes to that is, and sometimes, in some ways, our application deadline or our timeline is actually in some ways a little bit earlier of our peer institutions. So Rice actually does a really good job of getting this information out as quickly as possible, even compared to other prestigious universities in the country. So don't feel like you're going to be behind. Because again, we do a good job of getting everything in as early as possible and on time. Let's see if there's anything else. I think we can kind of move on to the next slide.
Sure thing. All right, I'm going to talk about some of the steps that come after that initial submission. So a next step is secondary applications or secondaries. So after you submit your primary applications to whichever application services you select, you may have to then prepare to submit secondary applications. And the way secondaries work can vary by school. So some schools do not have a secondary application. They make their decision entirely based on your primary application and interviews. Other schools may have a secondary application that's available immediately online. As soon as you submit your first application, you get access to that secondary. Some secondaries will be solicited after they receive your primary application, and some will be solicited after they review your application. They will decide to only send a secondary to some students. So there's all kinds of different ways that can happen. And it usually happens over those first few months after you submit your initial primary application. So ideally, mostly next summer. We do recommend that you submit secondaries quickly within 2 weeks of when you receive them. For one thing, as I said before, most of the schools will operate on a rolling admissions basis. So you want your application to be complete earlier in the cycle rather than later. Also, a slow return of a secondary application may well be interpreted as a lack of interest in that particular school. So I, certainly would advise you not to say, well, I'm saving this one because it's the school I really care about. I'm going to wait longer to get that one done. You want to be prompt, obviously with the balance of making sure that you also have good quality to what you're sending. But your application is generally not considered complete until the school has your secondary. Another step, of course, is interviews. So after secondary applications have been received and reviewed, then you should begin preparing for interviews. You can research the interview formats to see what the schools you've applied to are likely to do. They may be a mix of traditional one-on-one interviews versus the multiple mini interviews or MMIs that are increasingly popular with schools. So you can read more about that online for sure. You want to make sure that you can tell your story concisely. You want to draft some answers to possible questions. Our application will try to have some of those kinds of questions. When we meet with you, we'll try to have some of those questions. And you can certainly also find question banks on the internet. But you want to think about ways to present a substantive but not overly long answer. We will also have opportunities for mock interviews. RPMS, the Pre-Med Society here at Rice, does organize mock interviews for students who have met the OAA deadlines on a first-come, first-served basis. The OAA arranges for mock interviews for pre-dental students, and CAPC and the CCD will also host interview sessions. So we will advertise specifics in the spring, so be on the lookout for the email notifications that come through our Health Professions Advising. Once interviewing does begin, we do recommend that you inform your professors of any dates that may conflict. Again, as Marcos mentioned, more and more interviews are virtual and won't be as disruptive to your semester as those that require travel. But if it does come up, you want to certainly let your teachers know as quickly as possible. And if you decide to cancel an interview, or if you decide that it's not worth, you've decided not to keep your application open, then please do be respectful and inform the school as early as possible. So we're nearly to the end of our presentation, but we've got a long road ahead in the application process. It is a long road, and you need to be patient. You may want to update schools after you submit your application to tell them each new thing that happens. It's best to keep those updates to a minimum. They often aren't as impactful in the application process as it might seem. So if things come up, try to think, can I include this on my secondary? Perhaps I can share this in an interview. And not feel the need to constantly tell them the latest thing you've done. Though it is not unusual to send an interview maybe at the end of the fall semester, say next year, to give some kind of overview on anything that may have changed or any new accomplishments you have, as well as to state your continued interest in a school. Another part of the process for Texas residents that are applying to the Texas medical schools through the TMDSAS system or service, there is a process called the Texas Match. And it essentially allows students to rank the schools at which they have interviewed, and then it's sorted by an algorithm and, theoretically produces the optimum pairing between who the schools want and who the students want. And so there is a helpful video that outlines that process in the HPA 2026 resources folder in the acceptance protocols subfolder. So if you're curious about the Texas Match, you can look at that there. We also do remind you to please respond to all communications that are sent by the OAA and by the schools in a timely manner. And we do end up having to dismiss people from the open file process each year if they're not responsive and they don't get their things in. And we certainly don't want to do that through just a lack of communication. I'll second what Marco said before about not applying or interviewing at a school that you have no intention of attending. If you get into the school and then you decide not to attend, and you didn't get into other schools, that can be problematic. So once you get to the point where you think, you know what, even if I get in, I would not go there, we recommend withdrawing your application. A few more things to note. Please do be prepared. Read through the open file guides, which will go through a lot of this material that we've talked about again, and also the applicant manuals for each application service. They have very detailed application guides that talk you through each step and answer most of the questions you may have. And we also encourage you to set aside time to decompress. I know it is stressful and time consuming, and it's a long process. So we certainly wish you all the best and want you to also look after yourself during all of that. This is just something I want to show quickly. This is an AMCAS feature called the Choose Your Medical School tool. And these dates are consistent year to year, but I believe if one of the days falls on a holiday, then it's like the next business day or something like that. But this is essentially, these are the dates when this happens. And this is a feature on AMCAS that allows you to communicate your decision to medical schools and helps programs manage enrollment. There's certain steps at which the schools can see different things. Sometimes they're not going to see the individual that's saying they're thinking of applying there, but they can see the count of students who are, things like that, that again help them manage their acceptances. And then it becomes a point where you eventually do commit to a school, and then they can see who you are. So you can find more information about that on the AMCAS or AAMC website. Also does give you a little bit of an idea of when these decisions mostly come through. Few more resources I just wanted to call to your attention. Marcos already mentioned the personal statement workshop that will be on December 18th. We realize that is over the winter break. It's on Zoom. And it will be recorded, but we certainly encourage people to tune in at the time if you can, since Dr. Herman is there and can answer questions and personalize his comments. And so he's talking to you from CAPC doing this workshop. Again, it's for pre-medical or pre-dental students. Winter break is a great time to work on drafting that personal statement, so that we hope that timing is convenient and that we appreciate RPMS organizing that. There also has already been a gap year panel, but the recording is available on both the RPMS and the OAA website if you would like to see some newly matriculated Rice alumni who are newly matriculated to medical school, but who took one or more gap years before entering. They talk about their reasoning, their experiences, what they gained from it, anything they would do different, and so on. And I found it a really enjoyable recording. So I encourage you to also look at that if you're considering maybe taking a gap year or you already know that you are. We will have the mock interviews and the interview workshop. Those things will happen in the spring generally. The interview workshop maybe a little sooner, but those things will happen later on. And then there are, not only do we have all the OAA resources that I've pointed to, but there also are some resources on RPMS's webpage, which you can see there. So that concludes the bulk of our content. But if you have any questions that would benefit the entire group, we're going to give you a chance to ask them. Or if you have specific questions for your particular situation, I think Marcos and I and Sophia is also here. We'll try to stay on the line for a few minutes to answer them. But of course, you also can contact the OAA in the meanwhile. We do ask that you look at the resources that we provided, though, before setting up an appointment to ask a question that's already been answered. So again, thank you for being here. And we know this is just the start of this next several months of hard work. And as I said, we wish you all well. Sorry, I'm just catching up on chat right now.
Yeah, I think all of the chat questions have been answered already. I don't think there was anything outstanding that I can remember. Oh, there's a new one though. So it's taking the MCAT in March too late to be on time for the open file process. Thank you. Jordan, are you still online?
Yes, Jordan says yes.
All right, Jordan. Yeah. So, yeah, March isn't necessarily too late. I think one thing you're always going to want to consider when it comes to when you take your MCAT is it's still good to get as much stuff done in as early as possible. So if your MCAT is like more in the summer, then that might get to a point where it might be considered too late. So I definitely think March is not too late when it comes to A, the open file process, but then B, just the application process in general. What happens if there are more letters in the committee letter than a specific school asks for? Um, I will say again, we really want to push that idea of trying to keep the number as limited as possible. Again, I would say if you're at like say the 4 letter mark, you also want to consider that the committee letter will also be in addition to it. So then that would be 5, and that, to be very blunt, is it's a lot of letters for any school to read. You also, like we had mentioned, having too many letters, sometimes you run the risk of repetition, as well as, to be very honest, sometimes after a few letters, readers might just start, tuning out a little bit because they're just reading so many of them. So I would say do your best to definitely try to keep that number again to that 3 or 4 mark as much as possible, just so we don't avoid having too many letters sent. I'm not sure if that exactly answered your question, Anna, but if you have any clarifications, feel free to let us know.
I'll elaborate a little on that. I know there are occasionally schools that will say, we will only read 3 letters. And Sophia graciously will allow you to ask that the letters be attached to your committee letter in the order of your choosing. I don't know that we can guarantee they read the first 3. So, there's a little bit of a chance in there, which goes back to what Marco said about not just padding it with letters that are just going to say the same thing. Usually the committee letter packet for the purpose of the application services, and Sophia can chime in on this, I think is generally counted. That is counted as sort of 1 letter as far as uploading goes, in case you read limits about that. But, we do like caution you from adding too much again, just to keep saying the same thing.
I know that we still have a few people on the call, but if there are no other questions, we can go ahead and start wrapping up. Again, after today, if you do have any questions, like Dale had mentioned, definitely, go through the various materials. You can rewatch this recording. Ideally, the information and the resources we give you will pretty much answer any question you may have. But if for whatever reason it doesn't, you can always reach out to us and have any questions that you might have. So
I suppose one thing we failed to mention is that if you are in doubt about whether you're going to apply or not, you can go ahead and sign up for Open File and get access to the materials and kind of think about putting your materials together. And then along the way, if you say, you know what, I don't think I'm ready for this yet, you can withdraw. So in my view, there's not really a reason to wait till right at the deadline to sign up when you then have much less time to prepare your materials. So I think, no need to do it if you really don't think you're going to apply. But if you're seriously considering it and think it's pretty likely, I would suggest you go ahead and sign up for Open File, get access to everything, and then take those, 2 months to think about it rather than, making yourself have a really difficult last half of January putting everything together. Tomorrow morning. Sign up opens up. That was the question. You bet. All right. Well, thank you all for being here.
thank you.